Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition, and we're so grateful you can join us. And we're going to be talking about, of course, the confirmation hearings, and we'll get into that in some detail. Confirmation hearings for Judge Jackson. We'll get into more of that in just a minute. Talking about free speech, we'll talk about whether or not a food shortage is coming. That was an announcement by President Biden about banning books, maybe even the Great Reset, and even changing tech hubs, to mention just a few things that we'll be talking about over these next 2 hours. And the roundtable probably looks fairly familiar, because it's the same roundtable we had just a couple weeks ago when we were broadcasting live from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. Penna Dexter with me, as well as Lathan Watts, Director of Public Affairs. And it's great to have us all back together again here in Dallas.
Indeed. Thanks for having me.
It is great to be back. And that was a lot of fun, going to Nashville and being live and celebrating our Point of View 50th anniversary.
So again, I thought it might be good to maybe just ask around the round table. Lathan, you were there, and then I know you split off to go to Broadway, but I think you had a pretty good convention, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. First Liberty Live broadcast from there, and had some great guests, and recorded some that then we ran later. I did several interviews with a lot of the people that were there, and it was good. It was good to be there again. I'd been, I think, a couple of years since I'd been at the convention, but we had a great week.
Yeah, Penna, I thought it went very well, and I know both of you had to leave early, but we did receive an award for 50 years of broadcasting from the National Religious Broadcasters Convention.
Well, we got a lot of, I did miss the final banquet, but it was fun doing the show and just even walking around the convention and having people acknowledge that, because, I mean, that's kind of it's a big milestone, and, NRB's been around a long time, and Point of View's been a part of it, so to have that recognition, those congratulations, I mean, they really meant a lot.
A lot of people made some nice comments about just the number of individuals we had a chance to interview. And as a program note, I might just mention that a week from next Monday will be Truth Team. We'll have some of those same individuals, as well as some others that couldn't be at NRB, joining us there as well. So let's, if we can, maybe just get right into it. First of all, Lathan, I'll come to you, because the Senate Judiciary Committee, again, holding confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. And I think we learned some things, although we're still trying to figure out what a woman is. But what about all these things? Because these are questions that I think deserve answers. What is a woman? When does life begin? What about religious liberty? I wasn't real pleased with some of the answers. What are your thoughts?
No, not at all. The fact that she said she couldn't answer the question of what a woman is, that's not just, I mean, a lot of these things, frankly, are political theater.
Yes,
right?
of course.
Senators asking questions to hear themselves talk and to make themselves sound smart, so they can get video clips and send out on their next campaign, right? But when you consider what's going on with sex discrimination, Leah Thomas, or Thompson, whatever his name is, at Princeton, Title IX issues of protecting women's sports that are going to be coming up through the courts inevitably, and she is, being scrutinized for a seat on the United States Supreme Court, where these things will probably ultimately end up. And so you have potentially somebody on that court who's going to hear a case about sex discrimination against women, who cannot give a definition of what a woman is. To me, that alone disqualifies her for the job. I don't care where she went to law school or what court she sat on before. You take that. I think it was Senator Kennedy from Louisiana.
Yes.
Ask her because somebody else had already asked her when life begins, and she couldn't answer that. So he asked her. So when does the 14th Amendment's equal protection
Good question.
right attach
Very appropriate
to
question.
a person?
Yeah.
When does that start? And she could not answer that question.
Of course.
And if you don't think that question's coming up in a post-Dobbs environment, because the court's going to issue its decision on that abortion case probably the last day of the term in June, that question absolutely is coming up. And you don't know?
Those used to be disqualifying kinds of answers, didn't they?
It should be.
Yeah.
Whether or not it ever has been or not, it absolutely should be. And you take those two answers, plus she still cannot articulate what her judicial philosophy is. If you don't have a judicial philosophy, how can you be a judge? How does she get confirmed in the first place? For the first court that she was on. She then went on, I guess, later after being questioned again, and was talking about analyzing the law and the Constitution in its original context and its
sounds like
original
Scalia
meaning.
All of
She
a sudden.
sounded exactly.
Yeah.
I was listening to
Where'd
this
that come from?
answer.
Yeah.
Listen to this answer. Like, well, for somebody who doesn't have a judicial philosophy, you sound like a textualist in the mold of Scalia. And if that's the case, how in the world did you get nominated by Joe Biden? Because I guarantee you, it's not his philosophy.
That's right. Penna, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think with the statement about her judicial philosophy, about originalism, I think everyone knows that today, and this was certainly not true when Bork was nominated, and basically when he said he was an originalist, that was the end. And for 30 years, no one claimed to be an originalist until Gorsuch came in. And so now it's all popular to be an originalist, and so she's tried to say that she is, and so I guess the senators just have to say, well, was that performance? But going back to some of these questions, I mean, first of all, when Marsha Blackburn just sits there and talk about a woman, she's such a feminine senator, but she's so tough and strong. And she just asks the question, and then she's so surprised, that Ketanji Brown won't answer or can't. She says she cannot say what a woman is. She says, I'm not a biologist. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's really disingenuous, that you have to be an expert in the field to answer a basic question about gender.
I wish Senator Blackburn would have followed up when she said, I'm not a biologist, if she would have followed up and said, are you a woman?
She should have. That would have been great.
Or else say, turn around to your husband behind you who's a surgeon, and maybe he can help you out. That would have been a great line, too. But anyway, go ahead.
But, on biology, for instance, I mean, to be an expert, maybe you could claim that you need to be an expert if there's a case before the court. There's no case on transgender or anything going to the Supreme Court.
Not right now.
So she could have made a full-blown answer to that and should have. The other part of this that we didn't discuss yet was her sentencing on pornography cases.
Right. Haven't even talked about that.
That was a lot of time was spent on that, kind of at the leadership of Ted Cruz, but others too. And, the seriousness with which she takes pornography, I think, is something to be questioned also. But when you can't say about when life begins, you can't say what a woman is, this is playing into what's happening in our culture. It's bigger than this one confirmation hearing. It's amazing in how in so many arenas in the culture, we're having trouble now defining things that are true. And I read one thing in the Wall Street Journal today where they were talking about abortion, and somebody said, well, abortion is harmful to people who can get pregnant. They can't even say the mother or the woman. They use the word people who can get pregnant. That's where our culture is going, where we can't make these definitions. So, truth loses out, and I think we all lose out. And I think Lathan's right. We cannot let this continue.
That's right.
We need to stop it wherever it surfaces.
Post-truth culture. That's why we're going to be talking about Truth Team in a couple weeks. And when we come back, let's keep on this for just a few more minutes because there is a lot more to cover, and we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
George Barna has been doing an extensive inventory of worldviews in America through the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. He was on my radio program last week to talk about two of his most recent surveys dealing with truth and morality. Now, past generations of Americans viewed God as the basis of truth. Not only has that changed for the general population, it has also changed significantly within the church. He found that there are certain groups that rejected the idea of absolute truth. That would be members of the LGBTQ community, political liberals, spiritual skeptics, Democrats, and young people under the age of 50. By contrast, those most likely to see God as the basis of truth are the group called SageCons. That stands for Spiritually Active, Governance-Engaged Conservative Christians. Nearly 9 out of 10 point to God as the source of truth. More than 6 in 10 recognize the existence of absolute moral standards. In his next report, he decided to see how we apply moral principles in real-life situations. The questions ranged from telling a white lie to failing to pay back a loan to speeding to abortion. It was troubling to see what percentage of Americans felt that some of these behaviors were not even a moral issue. In some cases, a significant percentage might have believed it was a moral issue, but it was morally acceptable in today's society. Another troubling finding was what Barna calls a seismic shift in Christian views about morality. For example, born-again Christians in the survey were 3 times as likely to say they rely on the Bible for primary moral guidance, but less than half actually do so. The latest Barna surveys are a reminder to pastors and other Christian teachers that we need to make the case for moral absolutes based on God's Word. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, privileged to have in studio with us Penna Dexter as well as Lathan Watts. Let me just mention the first article we've posted is a piece that actually has been put together by Tony Perkins and Family Research Council, and it does a good job because it first of all talks about some of the quotes and questions from Senator Lindsey Graham, then goes on to talk about the questions Penna just mentioned a minute ago from Senator Marsha Blackburn, and of course one of the ones Lathan mentioned is the quote and questions from Senator John Kennedy about the whole issue of when life begins. And then also, we'll get to one in just a minute from Senator John Cornyn about really kind of gets into religious liberty and the whole issue of marriage. And of course, Penna also mentioned Josh Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley, talking about this whole issue of pornography, child pornography, and sentencing. And so it's a good kind of summary in case you haven't had the chance to really watch the hearings, because some people have said watching these Senate hearings is not exactly must-see TV. But a couple of times, especially the response to Marsha Blackburn about a woman, the response to John Kennedy about when life begins, and even the one with John Cornyn, if indeed Americans should be able to embrace natural marriage as a matter of religious freedom. And her answer is, well, Senator, that's in the nature of a right. When there's a right, it means that there are limitations on regulation, even if it means people are regulating pursuant to their sincerely held religious beliefs, which was a nice way of saying if there's a conflict between what we think is right and religion loses. Fair?
Yeah, that's exactly what she was saying. I mean, she basically took the Obergefell decision, where Justice Kennedy invented gay marriage and the right to it, and saying, well, that's the law now. And so, if your religious beliefs conflict with that, yes, you have a right to religious liberty, but
tough.
That can be regulated too.
Yeah.
They promised otherwise, but that has not played out. Going back to her definition of a woman, another point that's made in this article is that she was nominated because she's a black woman. That's why she's even standing up there. And the Democrats thought this is going to be, something that would get their base excited, and perhaps it is. I don't know. But now that she can't even define what a woman is, it's, it kind of takes some of the, I guess the enthusiasm out of it maybe for folks. It's just going to be interesting to see. She will be confirmed, but does this whole process of putting her on the court, what does this do to their base? Are they really that excited about it, or are they a bit embarrassed?
And Gwen, there has been all this criticism of some of the questions being asked by Marsha Blackburn and John Kennedy and some of the others, and even Ted Cruz. But I certainly remember that they were asking questions about Brett Kavanaugh's high school yearbook, right? And the various parties he goes to. So then when somebody says, can we at least get her LSAT scores, or can we see a little bit more of her judicial philosophy in some of her writings? That was somehow out of bounds. I'm not following that. Is anybody following that?
At least these questions, they're tough. Some of them are tough, and some of them are not really tough, but she's made it, controversial. But they're about the issues that she will be dealing with on the court. And, the Kavanaugh hearings were so personal. And
yes,
they were so bad. So I think the Republicans are conducting themselves very well.
I think that's appropriate. One of the people we had here last week was Keisha Russell, and I felt like I had to keep a secret for the entire week because I knew that she was going to actually testify, and she did that yesterday. Talk about that.
Yeah, she did. She did a great job. Read her prepared statement about the proper role of the judiciary and how the Constitution does not change, and frankly, KBJ, as she's now affectionately known as, also said in testimony that the Constitution is not a living document.
I know. I was amazed that she said that. I read that on the air just the other day. It sounded like against Scalia.
Right.
I just can't. Where's this coming from?
Sounds like KBJ is agreeing with our girl Keisha. And
did not say there was a super precedent or anything like that, and seemed to be more of an originalist than, frankly, a few of the people we have sitting on the court right now.
Yeah, exactly. If that's truly how she would rule, I'd be fine with that. But if you take a look at, the rest of her record and the fact that, she's got a pretty high reversal rate in the short time that she's been
Keisha talked
on
about
the court, including being overturned by the court that she currently sits on, the D.C. Circuit, who unanimously reversed one of her decisions for abuse of discretion. And that's as high a bar as it gets for reversing a lower court. That's pretty egregious. And for the D.C. Circuit, which is not a conservative court at all, to say that she had abused her discretion, that's why the judicial philosophy question is so important, because there is no more powerful seat when it comes to discretion than the United States Supreme Court.
Yes.
And if she's willing to abuse her discretion at a lower court,
I'm concerned.
You could, rightfully so, be concerned that she would abuse it on the highest court. And if she does not have a judicial philosophy, what that translates into English is that she's an outcome-based jurist.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a philosophy that you stick to, then it's just about basically whoever you want to win.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, we've mentioned Scalia's definition of, any judge who's happy with all of his rulings and the outcomes is a bad judge. That's why philosophy is important, because if you stick to the philosophy, you let the chips fall where they may.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you're not really going to like the result.
And we have some examples with Scalia, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, flag burning.
Yeah.
Right? He was...
Smith.
Well, certainly. But
got his attention with that one, didn't I?
When I was in law school, Justice Scalia gave a guest lecture at Ole Miss, and he talked about...
That must have been great.
...being an originalist, and he was kind of poking fun at the living document people, and he said, those of us who are textualists, original intent people, often end up with decisions that we don't really like. But the way the Constitution was intended, and a reason he gave the example of the flag burning case. And he said, look, the way I interpret the original intent of the First Amendment, to protect political speech and actions that are political speech, protects the burning of a flag. He's like, I hate to see somebody burn a flag. And, the day after that opinion came out, I had to walk into the kitchen, and my wife wouldn't speak to me, but she continually whistled Stars and Stripes Forever. And he said, none of you living document people ever have to deal with that, because it's a living document. It just means whatever it needs to mean for you to get what you want.
So good.
So this is why the philosophy question is so important, because you cannot have people, especially on the Supreme Court, who are just deciding things based on what they want to happen. And I can guarantee you that is what Joe Biden and the people running the government right now, whoever that is, that's what they want. They see the court system as a super legislature. When they cannot get what they want through the popularly elected legislature, they go to the courts. And so they want somebody who's going to give them the outcomes that they all agree on.
And right now, of course, a lot of people can look at this and say, well, it was a 6-3 court before, and after she's confirmed, it will be a 6-3 court. But you'd have to look down the road a little bit and say, okay, the court may not always be 6-3. I mean, what if the left really gets control of our government down the road? Maybe we have, a good election for a couple of years, and then after that, we don't. She could be a very dangerous liberal on the court down the road. And, I guess the question is, because we talked about this before she was even nominated, what kind of a justice would it be? Would it be sort of a Sotomayor who's kind of not that much of a heavyweight, doesn't really influence everybody else? Or will she be able to influence the court? Will she be able to pull some decisions that might have been more conservative to the left just with her arguing? And, I don't know the answer to that. She certainly tried to portray herself as palatable to everyone in the first day in all of her statements. But I think when we look at what happened after that, you can see, even though she wouldn't say things, the lack of her having answered questions shows how political she really is, and her decisions will be political.
Yeah.
And the one law that never gets broken is the law of unintended consequences. And if she is out there on the far left, further left than Sotomayor and Kagan, what she might inadvertently do is push Roberts to the right.
That's we've talked about that
And
as a
that
possibility.
wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yes.
to get Roberts
To
more in line
realize that
with the
we've
other
got to have a
five.
counterbalance to some of that as well. Well, we're going to take a break, and let me just, before we take a break, mention that when Keisha Russell presented that, she was trending in, Twitter yesterday, but it wasn't people giving her high fives. So if you would want to pray for her, she's, of course, was on with us last Friday. The amount of hue and cry that comes when somebody actually tries to speak the truth in the Senate Judiciary Committee, sometimes you get pilloried. So I'd pray for her, and I certainly appreciate her standing up. And last Friday we wanted to announce it, but we weren't allowed to do so. But you now have heard that she presented it, and you can go to First Liberty to see what she presented if you'd like. And we come back. What about this idea of not knowing what a woman is? Larry O'Connor calls it a hill worth dying on. Let's talk about that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Going to get to our second article in just a minute, a hill worth dying on. And the reason we do that is a lot of people say, well, when we talk about men and women, and maybe we don't have a culture right now that can define women because of the whole influence of the transgender movement and all the rest, what is its significance? But I thought it was interesting that Penna, one of the callers, just said, well, whatever happened to the X and Y chromosomes? I mean, obvious definition of a woman is 2 X chromosomes and a man is an XY chromosome. So
that's just too scientific.
Yeah, I mean,
it's way too biological.
I thought we were supposed to trust the science, you know.
We are,
and we're told that no, we just have to be non-binary, which just cracks me up. I've met some of the non-binary people, but it's pretty obvious, even if you meet non-binary people who introduce themselves with very interesting pronouns, you can still pretty much guess which side they are on. But this whole idea of a hill worth dying on is, Larry O'Connor reminds us, and I think Lathan just reminded us, that there's a lot more at stake. And when we are willing to redefine words so much, and we've already seen that with life, you know, it's not pro-abortion, it's pro-choice. We've seen that with marriage, it's same-sex marriage. And now when we can't even define what a woman is, there are real dire consequences, aren't there?
Yes, there are. And I think that, you know, we're coming to a point where it is so absurd and ridiculous. I think the swim meet where Leah Thomas, who was, you know, a good head or more taller than the second and third place winners of the NCAA championship, and so obviously a man, he hadn't even transitioned, he hadn't done any of those things to try to become more feminine. So it was very, very obvious. In stark relief, I think we can see that. And so it shows the ridiculousness of it, even though smart people, quote unquote, smart people on the left will not admit it. And then, you know, that happens. And then just a few days later, you have Ketanji Jackson coming in and not being able to define what a woman is. I mean, if we're not at an inflection point and people on the right and conservatives, especially people who are driven by their faith, do not stand up and tell the truth, I don't, you know, what are people afraid of? And this article makes the point that this hill is worth dying on, standing for the difference between men and women. And you're not going to lose your election because you do it. In fact, you know, give the American people a little credit to support you for telling the truth.
Yeah, I think this is kind of reminds me of, you know, Nixon's silent majority out there, and I think the overwhelming majority of people, they do just roll their eyes, you know, when they hear about all of this, but they are still afraid to say so, because the moment you do, you're, for lack of a better term, like tarred and feathered on social media, or you're canceled, or people, you know, come after you, like dox you, try to get you debanked, deplatformed, de-everythinged. But that's what it will take if we're going to turn a corner on this. Yes. I mean, you're just going to have to say, no, I'm not giving an inch. I will fight this on every front. You will not ever label me a cis male. Mm-hmm. No, I'm a man, and I will correct you if you try to label me as anything else. And you cannot participate in this madness, because that's what it is. We get to the point, it's like an old joke, like you can become so open-minded that your brain falls out. That's exactly what has happened. This is, you know, the emperor has no clothes on a global scale, except it's like the emperor has no sex organs, right? It's like, of course that's a woman. Of course that's a man. Leah Thomas isn't a woman competing against women. And why is it that every trans athlete that we know of is always a man who wants to compete with women?
Why is it the opposite?
We don't ever see a woman who thinks she's a man just dying to get in there and compete against men? That guy was ranked 462nd in the country as a man. And then he goes and wins the national championship, to say nothing of the people that he kept out of the competition by taking a spot. The girl who came in, quote, second, who, thank you, Ron DeSantis, who held a press conference and declared her the actual winner. It's everybody who cares about women's sports. Okay. And I don't know how many people that is who don't have daughters. All right. Mm-hmm. But if you do, this is absolutely a hill worth dying on.
Yes.
The NCAA has a real problem on their hands. Because Title IX basically forced colleges to spend money on women's sports that, from the college's perspective, did not really generate revenue for the university. Some of them are revenue or drags on revenue. They actually lose money doing it, but they're forced to because of Title IX to spend on these sports. The female athletes are going to probably at some point, and some already are, and they're getting booted off of Twitter for doing so, saying, if you allow men to compete in women's sports, I'm not going to compete. I'm here to compete against women. And if enough of those female athletes do that, the NCAA is going to have to figure out something to do with women's sports, because the universities, if they're looking at revenue, would probably say, well, okay, we don't have any women athletes. We don't have to spend any more money on women's sports then. Thanks. See you later, Title IX. It's no longer an issue for us because there are no women athletes.
Yeah.
Well, women's sports was kind of a heartstrings emotional issue when they were fighting for Title IX. When the feminist movement was working on all of that and getting education spending on everything for women as equal to men and, all these opportunities, I mean, it was considered a great victory, even though perhaps you're not competing yourself or your daughter is not competing. But it's just a really good picture of rights for women. And so, if it goes away, I mean, practically it just kind of has to go away if somebody doesn't stand up and do something about it. So, the feminist movement, where are they? I don't hear too many of them speaking. Some of these aging feminists who are actually in the fight aren't speaking. And, the younger feminists, maybe they don't understand what a battle it was.
Yeah, it's mostly men speaking about it, frankly. I mean, it really is.
And it's not even all transgenders. I mean, everybody knows who Caitlyn Jenner is, right? Has she been, she, he, whatever you want to say, been supporting this? No. I mean, there's a sense in which this isn't even completely pushed from the transgender movement, because there are people within that movement that disagree with this idea and see the unfairness of that, right?
Yeah, and this is also what happens when you on the left sort of define your movement and or your self-worth by how tolerant you are. Mm-hmm. If that's the defining characteristic, then you can't say no to anything, because the moment you say no to something, right, you are now intolerant, mm-hmm, right? And if that's what you prize above everything else, then you have to be open to everything. And then along comes something like this that puts you, two parts of your coalition, if you want to call it that, at odds with each other: the traditional feminists and the trans movement. And so much so they came up with a new term. They're always redefining words, right? So they came up with trans exclusionary radical feminist, right? TERF is what they call them.
TERF. J.K. Rowling and all those
exactly.
people. Yeah,
exactly. But I think their whole movement just continues to lose credibility the more this stuff comes up in pop culture, and it's unavoidable. And like I said, I think most people do just sort of roll their eyes at it, but that's not enough. It has to be contested everywhere. And I think this is an issue that's going to probably be a part of the midterm elections this fall. I know we got another piece we're probably going to talk about later in the show that talks about that very thing.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I pulled out this one here. Jim Garrity talked about this idea of a red tsunami. Remember we talked about that with Dr. Merrill Matthews. And again, I always have to issue the Lathan Watts disclaimer about the possibility of Republicans pulling defeat out of the jaws of victory. But it has been amazing that when you start asking individuals, not just this issue, although this one is certainly very significant, but you ask other questions about inflation, about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and all the various kinds of woke theology that is being promoted, and on and on and on. I just got a feeling that a lot of Americans, they may not be courageous enough to speak out, but when they actually go into the voting booth, they'll be able to express their opinion. And I got a feeling there are going to be a lot of people going to vote against some of these individuals that just can't bring themselves to define what a woman is.
A lot of people it's not that they're not courageous, maybe it's just that they're not that interested in getting involved in politics, but they do vote. And so I think there may be some big surprises there.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, just for a few minutes, I want to talk about this idea of free speech. That sort of surfaced, and it certainly surfaced a couple of weeks ago when we had the piece by Lathan Watts, but it also was very controversial when, of all things, the New York Times said we have a free speech problem, and there were people calling for the entire editorial board to resign.
Workers in the technology industry have long known that working remotely was feasible. But the COVID-19 pandemic made it a daily reality for millions. The Wall Street Journal's technology writer Christopher Mims explains how transformative this is turning out to be. He brings to bear the results of recent surveys by economists from several top universities in an article titled "The New Tech Hubs." For decades, tech companies were clustered in what Mr. Mims calls superstar cities in the San Francisco, New York, and Seattle areas. But now millions of Americans are moving, and companies, especially tech companies, are following them. These firms are bringing investment and more workers to what he calls rising star cities. The Brookings Institution reports that the work from anywhere crowd is heading to a diverse array of cities, including Atlanta, Dallas, Denver, Kansas City, and St. Louis. This trend has been years in the making. The pandemic dramatically accelerated it. A survey just released by Upwork, a platform connecting employers and freelance workers, shows that nearly 5 million Americans report having moved since 2020, and 18.9 million are planning to move. Economists from Stanford, MIT Sloan, Princeton, and other institutions have concluded from their research that about half of all U.S. workers currently perform their jobs remotely at least some of the time. Companies are increasingly willing to hire workers with the agreement at the outset that they will work remotely. Mr. Mims points to research that shows nearly a quarter of full workdays will happen at home after the pandemic ends, as opposed to 5% before the pandemic. This phenomenon is taking workers and their families away from blue states to redder areas of the country. It brings demographic changes that will affect politics. It provides opportunities for ministry to individuals and families looking for connection. Remote workers are not meeting new friends at the office. Believers should be looking for ways to draw them in to Christian community. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that one of the articles we have not posted, but we posted in the past, and I'll hold it up here, was by our good friend Lathan Watts. And you were talking about the idea of religious liberty, but then you sort of developed the idea of free speech. And I love what you say later on, that is, when we're confronted with ideas with which we disagree, the proper response is introspection. And of course, the Proverbs talk about the fact iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So if anything, Christians should be on the forefront of free speech, and liberals used to be on the forefront of free speech. I wanted to get your comments about two things. First of all, I have mentioned this, and it is something we posted the other day, but the New York Times, which is amazing to me, had an editorial by the editors of the paper, America has a free speech problem. And then they even talked about the problem of cancel culture and pointed out a full third of Americans said they don't feel that Americans actually enjoy freedom of speech. And they went on to give some facts and figures and some of the statistics and the surveys. And the result of this was there were people calling for the editorial editorial board to retract everything, to apologize, and more than once on Twitter, again, this is another one which was actually a very significant number of tweets, calling for the entire editorial board of the New York Times to resign. But I thought it was interesting because they said a full-throated defense of free speech was once a liberal idea. Do you remember that? Oh, I do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I'm old enough to remember that, or maybe I've at least heard good stories about it. Yeah, the editorial board of the New York Times, that bastion of radical conservatism.
Oh, boy. Where in the world? And just the idea of suggesting free speech. That just went
exactly.
nuts.
And this is another sort of looming kind of crack in the coalition on the left. You have sort of old school classical liberals like the New York Times, like somebody like Bill Maher, who
Alan Dershowitz has been on the program.
Right.
Hardly ever disagree with him on the idea of free speech.
Constantly pointing out our side is losing their way on this. This is not the way to go. You don't shout somebody down. The answer to speech you don't like is more speech. It's to confront that speech with your point of view, not to say you're not allowed to say that, because just because your view might be the popular one right now, there's no guarantee that it will be in the future. And if you engage in this now, you are setting yourself up to be the one who is silenced later.
Sure.
When your view is when some view of yours is no longer the popular one.
Let me get one other issue, and then, of course, Penna has some things we're going to be talking about, and that is Yale Law School. They had a panel, and the irony is that they had a mob protest show up when the focus was on a panel to show how lawyers from different ends of the political spectrum could agree on issues like free speech. One was Monica Miller. She's a secular progressive associated with the American Humanist Association. The other is somebody we all know, Kristen Wagner, who is a conservative with Alliance Defending Freedom, And these students said things that I could not say. If I did, I'm sure that Doug would hit the swear button real quick, or we'd get letters and all. I mean, it's just unbelievable how upset the students became, and they actually had to have the speakers escorted from the room by the police. But Yale University and Yale Law School don't seem like they're going to do anything about it. But one judge who you know, Lauren Silberman, who serves on the D.C. Court of Appeals, decided to send a letter to all the judges saying any student involved in this disruption maybe should be disqualified from potential clerkship. What about that?
Well, good for him. And thank God somebody did, because that might be the one thing that starts law schools back in the right direction, because law schools love to brag about where their kids end up. And clerking for federal judges is a prestigious thing. And if you are disqualified from doing that because you acted like a fool in front of two very accomplished lawyers, maybe Yale Law School will do something about it. This isn't the undergrads. This isn't your...
These are 20-somethings, 30-somethings that are acting like 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds.
Absolutely.
Really?
I mean, and it's inexcusable at the undergrad level, too, but we've come, almost accustomed to it in the undergrad level with, the pink-haired, tattooed, look like they fell face first into a tackle box, showing up to just yell and scream and shout down somebody that they don't like.
Right.
These are the people who are supposed to be the future guardians of the Constitution. These are future attorneys. Yeah. These are people who are being trained, supposedly, to be handmaidens of the law, right? To respect the law and to enforce it and to guard it. I mean, and the way they acted is preposterous. And some of the press tried to kind of sweep it under the rug, say, no, it really wasn't that bad.
Watch the video.
Until the video came out.
Whoa, watch the video. I could not play that on here without the FCC getting really upset. And Penna, my argument has simply been that, look, they may not care about the First Amendment, but maybe they care about their legal careers.
Maybe.
And, it's the old, if they don't see the light, maybe they'll feel the heat.
This was 417 law students. This was 2/3 almost of the student body at Yale. So I do think the letter out from Mr. Silverman to the justices, not to allow them to be clerks is good. But I also think that Yale really fell down and not doing anything, because Yale and Harvard are the schools where many of the judges that populate the circuit courts and certainly the Supreme Court come from. It's where a lot of people who with law degrees end up being, in government. And so this is the elite of the elite, and they're acting like this. And, they prejudged, and they didn't allow, it wasn't just a speaker, it wasn't just Kristen Wagner from ADF coming and speaking.
It was a professor even telling them to grow up, who was not necessarily agreeing with Kristen Wagner, but there you go.
And so and this is also ADF in itself, even if it had just been her, they are a powerful, successful group who has won 12 cases at the Supreme Court. So, not to allow, this is just the antithesis of who you are if you are in the legal profession, that you would not hear both sides of the argument.
Well, and if, again, getting back to the law of unintended consequences, if this is the first step towards maybe, we get some judges appointed who didn't go to Harvard and Yale, then I'm all for it.
That would not be a bad outcome.
Because there are thousands of brilliant law students in law schools all over the country who are not at Harvard and Yale. Okay, I work with some great attorneys.
Yes.
And we've got a couple of Harvard law people on staff, but we got plenty who aren't. Mm-hmm. And they're outstanding attorneys. And this notion that, the only way to get, on a federal bench is you got to go through the Ivy League is nonsense, and it's elitism at its worst. You find the best person for the job, and you appoint them, and you get them confirmed.
Yes.
And there are plenty of people qualified who don't have Ivy on their resume.
Sometimes Ivy is just a descriptor that causes that people to get looked at.
Yes.
And in a sense, it could backfire, because when you have things like this happening, Ivy could actually become a pejorative because it's so radically crazy there. And so, you don't have grown-ups graduating from there. It could be, something that actually works against these kids from
none of this
jobs.
is intended as offense to Ivy, who's helping out in the booth today.
Ivy Nichols.
She's great. That's the kind of Ivy we like.
Yeah, we like that kind of Ivy. By the way, while we're having some fun, anybody been watching on the screen will notice that you are wearing I Love the Razorbacks. So
That's right.
I do need to mention that on Saturday, right, that is when the Arkansas Razorbacks are playing Duke. Now, again, with apologies to some of our friends in North Carolina, but nevertheless, I think you're rooting for the Razorbacks.
Yes, I was very, very happy that we beat the number one seed in the entire tournament last night, Gonzaga, and now we have the opportunity to end Coach K's career, which would be a dream of mine.
Well, anyway, we will be watching March Madness, but we need to take a break, and we'll get back in a couple of things we're going to be talking about. Food shortage, banning books, the Great Reset. Oh, we've got a lot more to cover. We'll do all that right after
Having
this.
civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary. because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First hour, spent some time talking about the confirmation hearings and, of course, the other issues, for example, of the definition of a woman and the impact that would have and the whole issue of free speech. But let's, if we can, remind ourselves once again that there's a war taking place in Ukraine. I found this very good map. Actually, it was sent by a good friend, Kim Black, and it was one that actually gives you a better understanding of what is happening, which particular areas of Ukraine are actually held by the Russians, the ongoing battle, and much, much more. So there are quite a number of topics we could address, but I thought it would be good because our third article is President Biden says that the food shortage is coming. And this is, I think, something to think about because on February 24th, just 1 month ago, he said we're going to put these very substantial sanctions on Russia, and then check with me a month later. Okay, it's a month later. The other day I talked a little bit about the impact it's having on Russia. It is devastating. More on the Russian people than it is on him. But there's another part, Penna Dexter, because when I look at this, I went through how the sanctions have affected global energy prices, exports like nickel and palladium and aluminum and all those kinds of things. But what I wanted to focus on for just a minute is how it's affecting food. Now, I know some people watch online, and I'll show you the graph of, if you want to look at just wheat, that it is interesting because what you will see very quickly is that if you add up both Russia and Ukraine, almost a quarter of all the wheat produced in the world comes either from Russia or Ukraine, actually much more from Ukraine. Ukraine has always been the breadbasket of Europe. And when you start adding that up to the fact that they're not planting any wheat, there are Russian tanks running over all of that. And then when you add to it the fact that the whole cost of transporting goods is much more significant, because if you want to get those goods, for example, across or Europe and Asia, well, that would be on a rail called the China-Europe Railway, but it goes through Russia, and Russia is restricting that. If you want to fly it on air freight, well, that again would require you to fly over Russia, and they're not allowing people to fly over Russia. You have sanctions against Russia, so that's increased the cost of logistics. Ships are refusing to actually allow Russian ships to come to their ports. Russian ships are not getting in, and then some Western ships are not making their way to Russian ports. All of that together, this is where you have Katie Pavlich talking about the fact that now we might have food shortages. What about that?
Another product she mentioned coming out of Ukraine is fertilizer.
Yes, potash, yes, in particular.
So that's huge. And yeah, I mean, sometimes countries will they'll adapt. The international system will adapt, but it takes time. And it's just amazing to me. I still am trying to understand the motivation of Putin, because he's really undermined the successes that he's achieved over his entire regime. And he's brought the country to a certain point, and I don't know whether he miscalculated what the international reaction would be in sanctioning the strength of the sanctions or what. But, and perhaps he is willing to stand on this and destroy his country, but that's what he's doing.
Well, and to the point of this article, if there's a food shortage in this country, it is not Putin's fault. Okay, no matter what our president tells you, like gas prices, that's all Putin's fault.
No, we know
Everybody
better.
knows
Yeah.
gas prices were going through the roof before any of this started. This administration has been a day late, a dollar short on everything related to this crisis. And just like Penna said, countries can adapt, if there's not going to be wheat coming out of Ukraine and Russia, but wheat doesn't grow overnight. Okay. This is what you should have been addressing day one, first day in office. The first time Putin starts making noise about going into this is what you have to do. Now, Biden, supposedly met with the cover model from Canada, Trudeau,
Justin Trudeau,
while they were at NATO, I guess, or the G7 somewhere, and was talking to him about Canada producing more and us producing more. But I don't know if he knows anything about farming, but you can't just say, hey, we need more wheat.
Yeah.
Next month.
Right. I mean,
and you also need fertilizer. You mentioned potash. Do you realize that the biggest producers of potash, not that this is something everybody thinks about, are Russia and Belarus? And so once you take those off, then the only other real good producer is Canada. And so you don't have the ability. We can't produce fertilizer in countries that don't have fertilizer. You can't get oil in countries that don't have oil reserves. And you can't grow wheat in places that don't allow wheat to grow. So let's just understand some of that.
And it's more evidence of what many have said about Joe Biden has been wrong on every foreign policy issue for 50 years. Ronald Reagan was telling the Germans, do not approve this gas pipeline from Russia into Europe because you will end up dependent on them, and they're not your friends.
Yeah, Donald Trump, said that. Yeah,
I mean, but yes, but all the way back to the Reagan era, they were talking about this. That look, you don't need back then when we had a Cold War, Reagan is saying you can rely on us. You do not want to rely on them.
You do not.
And yes, the previous president, Trump, said, what are you doing?
Right.
Why are you doing this? We can sell you gas. We're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. And we were exporting oil and gas by the end of the Trump administration. Biden came in, killed all that, and here we are. And he's been wrong on every step of the way on this. And to go back to sort of what we were talking about earlier, not being able to define a woman, if he manages to bungle us into World War III, are we going to allow people to just say, well, I'm a woman now, so I don't have to register for the draft? Because let me tell you, if this ends up in World War III, you're going to need every able-bodied man. Yeah. If you are up against Russia and potentially China, then, but we don't know what a man or a woman is, then anybody who doesn't want to serve or sign up for the draft is, well, I identify as a woman. That's an episode of MASH, right? I mean, that's Klinger from MASH. We're living in a sitcom at this point. And I wish it was funny, right? But it is.
You're getting thumbs up on the other side of the glass.
Threat.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I mean,
it would be funny.
It
would be funny if it weren't so serious.
It is just unbelievable how bad it has become. And again, back to this issue, getting rid of the Keystone XL pipeline and then having a foreign policy that looks like the Keystone Cops. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, those are the lines that we are using right now to try to talk about this whole disaster that's unfolding. And again, this assumption that, well, all we have to do is ask a few other countries to try to generate a little bit more energy or grow a little bit more wheat. That isn't going to happen anytime soon.
We could have been a backstop for the world and actually, in some senses, benefited from this crisis if we had just begun when this started to be a threat to ramp up our oil production, to begin the leases, to open the pipelines, and to stop punishing our fossil fuel companies. If we had done that, we could have actually benefited from this. Instead, we are going to suffer.
Well, again, we're going to take a break and we'll get into this in a little bit more detail. A couple other things to put on the table. But again, love to get your thoughts. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
George Barna has been doing an extensive inventory of worldviews in America through the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. He was on my radio program last week to talk about two of his most recent surveys dealing with truth and morality. Now, past generations of Americans viewed God as the basis of truth. Not only has that changed for the general population, it has also changed significantly within the church. He found that there are certain groups that rejected the idea of absolute truth. That would be members of the LGBTQ community, political liberals, spiritual skeptics, Democrats, and young people under the age of 50. By contrast, those most likely to see God as the basis of truth are the group called SageCons. That stands for Spiritually Active, Governance-Engaged Conservative Christians. Nearly 9 out of 10 point to God as the source of truth. More than 6 in 10 recognize the existence of absolute moral standards. In his next report, he decided to see how we apply moral principles in real-life situations. The questions ranged from telling a white lie to failing to pay back a loan to speeding to abortion. It was troubling to see what percentage of Americans felt that some of these behaviors were not even a moral issue. In some cases, a significant percentage might have believed it was a moral issue, but it was morally acceptable in today's society. Another troubling finding was what Barna calls a seismic shift in Christian views about morality. For example, born-again Christians in the survey were 3 times as likely to say they rely on the Bible for primary moral guidance, but less than half actually do so. The latest Barna surveys are a reminder to pastors and other Christian teachers that we need to make the case for moral absolutes based on God's Word. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts will take that call that just came in a minute ago on the issue of farming. But Lathan said something in passing, and actually both of you sort of alluded to that. Penna, you talked about it as well, the miscalculation from Vladimir Putin. And there was a good piece that came out the other day by Kevin Williamson called Autocracy's Fatal Flaws. You know, if you think of a dictator or an autocrat, they may look strong, but because they live in a society where there's no freedom, they surround themselves with individuals that never give them contrary information. They're surrounded with people that flatter them, encourage them. They're kind of lackeys. They're sycophants, if you want to use a big word like that. And so I think everybody was surprised. You would have assumed that the Russian army would be more effective. I honestly think that Vladimir Putin thought that this would just be a couple days, he'd be in there, and that would be that. And I think he did miscalculated not only on the success of the Russian army, but also on the response from the Western governments, including from, of course, Joe Biden. How strong does the Russian army look right now? I mean, they are in a quagmire. Maybe they'll take over Kyiv and some other things eventually, but this is something that really didn't work out so well for them, and it's a lesson that I think we should learn, because free societies don't allow people to make mistakes. In free societies, if you make a mistake, we learn from that mistake and we try again. Yeah. And whether it's China or North Korea or Russia, I think in some respects we're seeing what happens when you have a dictator that will never allow anything other than a positive review for their military or their military procurements.
I know. You know, there's a lot of people out there talking about the fact that it could have been on purpose that he didn't come out strong at the very beginning, that he was trying to just allow some success on the part of Ukraine and turn it into something where they would come back and agree to some kind of a territorial exchange or whatever. But, it's getting so bad now that it's hard to even think that might be the case, at least in my opinion. I do think that there's either some kind of unrealistic, over-optimistic part of Putin that was just, probably maybe a little utopian or something, where he just thought that he had much more strength than he really truly did.
That's also what makes the situation so dangerous.
It does make it dangerous.
He absolutely cannot lose.
Yes.
He cannot
there you go.
lose. He risks a coup from within if he does so. If the suffering of his own people gets bad enough, he's by some reports distrusting his own people at this point. And if he is backed into this sort of corner where it looks like he's losing, and he's head of a military that has something like 5,000 nuclear weapons, this is when he'll be tempted to use them.
I'm concerned about that.
And if he does, that is likely the beginning of World War III. I mean, frankly, the Europeans absolutely cannot let that happen, regardless of whether Ukraine's in NATO or not. This is what NATO was founded to prevent, right? Keep, the phrase was, keep the Russians out and the Germans down, basically. That's, and that's what makes this so dangerous, because he is in that position, and who knows what he will do if he does think he's losing.
The question is, we've been ramping up the sanctions, but what should the rest of the world do? What should the rest of the West do? Some of the things that, to me, that Ukraine is asking for, Zelensky is asking for, should be offered. For instance, more air power, more tanks. And I know that the calculation is that we would start to escalate, because even if we provide weapons and don't provide troops, and if we don't really enter the war ourselves. But, I guess the question is, are we getting to the point now where we just need to offer them as much in terms of military equipment as we possibly can? They're willing to do the fighting.
Well, again, one of the commentaries I had coming out earlier in the week is, are we at war? And again, the argument is made, we're at war when Vladimir Putin thinks we're at war. Remember when we essentially were at war and didn't know it, when radical Islam even attacked our embassies and everything, but we finally figured out, I guess we're at war in 9/11. We aren't the ones to determine whether we're at war. Vladimir Putin is, and he can use any pretext at all, including the fact of whether or not we provided MiG-29s through Poland, through the Ramstein Air Base in Germany. So, he can do that, but to, again, be fearful of him and to show weakness is not the thing that we should be showing right now, don't you think?
No, of course not. That's it's been proven time and time and time again in history that weakness invites aggression. You cannot define your policy by what Vladimir Putin says would be an escalation. Okay. We armed the locals in Afghanistan when the Russians invaded Afghanistan, and we armed them for years until they ran the Russians out of Afghanistan. So the one thing you don't do is publicly, repeatedly tell Vladimir Putin what you won't do,
what you're not going to do.
Okay, if you
Donald
think
Trump didn't do that. They never knew what he was going to do, and
exactly.
They never knew what Ronald Reagan was going to do.
Exactly, and that's why they didn't mess with us, right? So there's two approaches to this. There's the Reagan approach, where you be the biggest kid on the block, and everybody will leave you alone, and that's what he did. He beefed up our military, and the Russians bankrupted themselves trying to keep up. The other approach is you're the kid on the block that nobody quite knows what that kid will do if you pick on him. That's the Donald Trump approach. Yeah. He may not be the biggest, but he might be just a little bit crazy. And if you pick on that kid, there's no telling what he will do, right? And a combination
I think Putin
of the
is
two.
making that calculation too.
Probably.
Some of us think he's
absolutely
crazy, and some of us think he's shrewd.
But he has made the calculation that Biden won't do anything about it. He made the calculation that Obama wouldn't do anything about it. He made the calculation that Bush 43 wouldn't do anything about it.
Sort of figured that out, didn't
exactly.
he? That's what they saw.
And you
Crimea,
cannot define
Georgia, and now
the answer
Ukraine. Yep.
by what he would consider to be an escalation. If you think the right thing to do is to get the Ukrainians the MiGs, then you do it. And you don't necessarily hold a press conference and tell the whole world, including your enemy, what you're going to do and what you don't do. If Ukraine asks for them, Poland says, we'll give them to you, but we got to backfill ours. Then we backfill Poland. Okay? And you cannot make policy based on what your enemy wants or does not want.
Not a good way to go. Well, we got a lot of phone calls, and so let me take some. A lot of them have to do with food, because we have talked about, and that is our third article, food shortage. So let's head to the state of Texas. Jeanette, thank you for joining us today. Jeanette, are you there? Let me put you on hold for a minute, maybe, and I'll go out to Alaska first. Patsy in Alaska, I think you want to talk about these issues too.
Well, yeah, I'm an Okie from Oklahoma originally, and I'm wondering if the farmers in Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, et cetera, are gearing up for this
They should.
food shortage, because they plant a lot of wheat there.
And that, I think, is something to say that this could be almost like a Manhattan Project, say, for the good of this country and even for the good of what could be starving people in other parts of the world. Can you actually put more food under more wheat and other things under cultivation? Which brings us back to, I think, and now we have Jeanette in Texas. Jeanette, thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. I really depend on shows like yours to get the truth of what's going on. My question is this. I have been hearing of farmers getting letters from the government to pay them to plow up their crops, and if they refuse to plow up their crops, they will not receive subsidy.
And
have
again,
you heard anything about that?
We've had situations over these decades in which we've paid farmers not to grow certain kinds of crops because they want price supports and things of that nature. But at a time when we got a crisis, I don't know, doesn't that seem like the time to turn this around and say, instead of plowing it up, you should plant and then harvest that, right?
Yeah, that goes all the way back to the New Deal. We started doing that with FDR and the Great Depression. Yeah, trying to prop up the price of something so that the people who do depend on that as their livelihood get a better price for it, and you end up, completely messing up the free market of the actual value of it, to where it becomes more the government paying a farmer not to grow something versus the farmer growing a product and selling it and making a profit and supporting his family that way. It was a bad idea when FDR did it. It's a bad idea now if we're still doing it. And I think the Department of Agriculture still has more employees than there are farmers in America.
It's just a sad commentary. This is another example of maybe we could say that our farmers now are part of our front line. We've talked about that before. We've talked about nurses and doctors and things like that as we get into this possible food shortage, which is going to affect people in other countries more than us. But again, if we are concerned about feeding hungry people, America can do it. We just need to get involved. We'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. We have about half an hour left, and we'll do our best to cover a couple of other articles, one of which is our fourth article, School Boards Are Not Banning Books. Now, if you've been paying attention, and those of us around the table live in the state of Texas right now, just down the road in, first of all, Carroll ISD and then Granbury ISD, there have been some controversies about banning books. Now, first of all, you got to understand that that word is completely misused. I jokingly used to to say years ago when people talk about book banning, well, every school library I've ever been in bans my books because my books are not in there. I mean, that's the part you have to recognize. Just because you don't have a particular book that you want in the library, whether it's in a school library or the public library, doesn't mean it's necessarily banned. Okay, so let's put that in a perspective. But we did want to talk about that. A very good piece by Victor Davis Hanson on the Great Reset. Then after our break, of course, Penna Dexter has been talking about changing tech hubs. So you might want to listen to that in about 10 minutes. If you're listening online, we'll talk about that. And I do want Lathan to remind us about all these cases, of which 3 of these cases are in front of the Supreme Court, and it's a matter of prayer. And certainly you can sign up to find out a little bit more. But Penna Dexter, free speech does not mean that libraries have to stock every book that some leftist demands.
No, they don't. And, part of it has to do with school boards. They're elected officials. People move to certain communities because that's the community where they want to raise their family. Perhaps they think that they will get their type of education, their type of library, if they move there. And, in this area that this article is about, this is an area where parents are very aware. They became, during COVID, very aware of what was going on in the schools. And they already began to fight back. They changed the face and the composition of their school boards in some of those areas. And so they certainly don't have to put it all. There's nothing that says they have to put all the progressive, pro-gay, pro-trans indoctrination into a leftist agenda books in the library. They don't have to do it, and that doesn't mean they're violating anything about free speech. Actually, the school boards, the elected officials, really get to decide. The librarians are hired bureaucrats, and so and you can't put every book that's ever been written in a library, as you said. You can't put all books in all libraries. So it really gets to be up to the people that live there.
And it's always amazing to me, and I want to get Lathan's comments, that the books that they fight over are ones I've never heard of. Some of these books that I think belong in the library are those that have stood the test of time. Right. Some of the classics that have actually endured just the more than just the recent a push to try to get this transgender woman who was growing up in Guatemala's comments about what it was like to live her life, but maybe some that really have some kind of aspirational teaching that would be worthwhile. And for those of us that in high school were fortunate enough to take good English classes, and I even took a class on the great books of the Western world, I am the beneficiary of that. And Lathan, I want to come to you because I know your kids go to a classical Christian school, and I've been impressed by how these kids are learning even things I didn't learn back when I was in school, and they're going to be so much better prepared for life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the school they go to is not even a private Christian school. It's a public charter school. It's a classical academy. There's no official religion that's taught there, but they study religion there. They study the influence of religion on Western civilization. So they study Christianity without, but they study Judaism and Catholicism, Protestant, and they study its influence on Western civilization. Sure. And yes, they read the great books. And if you're in one of these communities that has decided that we don't want every trans autobiography ever written in our school library, but you're just bound to determine for your kid to read it, then buy it on Amazon and give it to your kid and let him read it at home. It is not a requirement, just like we've said, that these publicly funded public schools who are accountable to elected school board members must in some way put every possible book into a public library, a public school library. These people are elected, these school board members, they have expressed their opinion. School board members are following what the people who elected them want them to do. And look, that's how it works. This is federalism at the local level. If you don't like it, move to a different school district. If every district in the state of Texas does this, or if the state of Texas decides to do it through our state board of education, and like I said, the most important thing to you in life is that your kid read about being a gay teen, then move to California. Vote with your feet, because I guarantee you it'll be force-fed them in San Francisco, and that's okay. We have 50 states for a reason. there are very few things that are supposed to be the same all over America. People who like the way Texas do things live in Texas. People who like the way California does things live in California.
I don't think, I mean, there may be some parents, there are some parents who want their children to be exposed to all of this. But I really don't think there are that many parents that want this. It's more, people move to a conservative community, they expect it to be conservative, but they must realize that a lot of the directives about education are coming from the federal level. Mm-hmm. And because there's some money coming in, not a lot, but enough to buy liberalism, progressivism, leftism. So the people that you employ often are more progressive, and especially in the library industry, it's very liberal. And so, so you're going to see this stuff coming in, but if you care, then you get involved. And that's what happened in Southlake and Carroll, where they took over the school board basically, and they still have to but you still have to stay involved. You can never stop. You still have to watchdog if your children, are in the public schools. And I think what happened in Florida with Ron DeSantis with this parents' rights bill, and that's really what it was. It wasn't a don't say gay bill. The left tried to call it that, never even used the word gay. But, when you look at the polling, even of Democrats, 52% of Democrats liked that bill.
Yes, they did.
They wanted to see, the LGBT indoctrination out of the schools. And this bill only pertained to grades 1 through 4, I believe. Mm-hmm. So Governor DeSantis, he's just out there speaking common sense. This is not what parents wanted. They didn't want this. So we're going to pass a bill that's going to prevent the children from being indoctrinated at such a young age. If you don't like it, then you're probably in the minority in Florida.
And who in the right mind thinks it's a good idea to talk about sex and sexuality and gender on any level with kids age 5 to 9?
Right.
I mean, that's what the bill said
Disney.
We're not going to do.
Yeah. And we had Keisha on. She says, well, first of all, I used to be a teacher, and I can tell you that even some of the things they're trying to teach right now actually are illegal and unconstitutional anyway. And so this bill was just to try to straighten that up. But I wanted to get a comment from a school librarian. And Ruth is in South Carolina, WHBJ. Ruth, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Ruth.
Do we have Ruth?
Impatient. Hey there. Hey, I'm just impassioned about this topic because I think it's been grossly misunderstood. Most school librarians don't seek to ban books, and I appreciate the clarification on banned books because I actually set up a display during Banned Book Week, and some of the books that are banned, of course, are To Kill a Mockingbird, right, and those classic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's put it in perspective. Well, we can talk censorship, but when you're talking a school library, school librarians are charged with providing age-appropriate materials, and that is the key.
Yes.
I'm a Christian first and foremost, and then I'm a school librarian. And one of the particular titles in our state that was heavily spotlighted, I'll just call the title, it's called Queer Gender, graphic novel. It was extremely graphic.
Yes.
It was appalling. It was shocking. And I thought, who in their right mind would put this in a school library? And there were some school librarians that said at the high school level that said that would provide students with material for exploring their identity. Well, that's when you go to the public library. School libraries and public libraries operate very differently.
Yes.
If that's the way you feel, that would be in the public library. That would mean that the parent would go with the student to that library. When they're under our roof in our schools, they are really at our beck and call. We are in charge of them, and I take that very seriously.
Good
and
for you.
I act as their parent. I act as their guardian, and I would never put something in their hand that could damage them emotionally, mentally, or socially.
Very good. Taking a break. Ruth, we really appreciate you, and we're just up on a break, but thank you for your comments, and thank you for being a Christian and a librarian, and thinking about such concepts as age appropriate. What a good idea. Penna Dexter's commentary. We'll come back and talk about that right after this.
Workers in the technology industry have long known that working remotely was feasible. But the COVID-19 pandemic made it a daily reality for millions. The Wall Street Journal's technology writer Christopher Mims explains how transformative this is turning out to be. He brings to bear the results of recent surveys by economists from several top universities in an article titled "The New Tech Hubs." For decades, tech companies were clustered in what Mr. Mims calls superstar cities in the San Francisco, New York, and Seattle areas. But now millions of Americans are moving, and companies, especially tech companies, are following them. These firms are bringing investment and more workers to what he calls rising star cities. The Brookings Institution reports that the work from anywhere crowd is heading to a diverse array of cities, including Atlanta, Dallas, Denver, Kansas City, and St. Louis. This trend has been years in the making. The pandemic dramatically accelerated it. A survey just released by Upwork, a platform connecting employers and freelance workers, shows that nearly 5 million Americans report having moved since 2020, and 18.9 million are planning to move. Economists from Stanford, MIT Sloan, Princeton, and other institutions have concluded from their research that about half of all U.S. workers currently perform their jobs remotely at least some of the time. Companies are increasingly willing to hire workers with the agreement at the outset that they will work remotely. Mr. Mims points to research that shows nearly a quarter of full workdays will happen at home after the pandemic ends, as opposed to 5% before the pandemic. This phenomenon is taking workers and their families away from blue states to redder areas of the country. It brings demographic changes that will affect politics. It provides opportunities for ministry to individuals and families looking for connection. Remote workers are not meeting new friends at the office. Believers should be looking for ways to draw them in to Christian community. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and again, Penna Dexter's commentary, which is on our website right now. And if you sign up to get the commentaries, my commentary comes to your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna's comes to you on Saturday. It's entitled Changing Tech Hubs, and it just shows the remarkable changes that are taking place, one, because of the internet, and two, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, Penna, this is one that I think we should recognize, just kind of the changing of the American workforce and lifestyle.
We're all seeing it, and, you know, it started before the COVID-19 pandemic, well before that. For decades, really, we've been seeing that tech people that are employed by the big tech companies don't necessarily all have to be employed in Silicon Valley or in Seattle or in New York. They used to, and those places were, you know, prospering, expensive to live in. They still are. But you know, people just started, because of all our technology that enables you to work remotely, to do just about everything that you could do in the office from your home, from your computer, your laptop, or whatever. People began moving to other parts of the country. Well, COVID-19 hit, and that was just a shot in the arm to that trend of remote working. And I mean, after a while, after people saw that it was going to last a while, they started moving back home to be near mom and dad, or to a small town, or to a community that they would always wanted to live in. But what's really happened from that is there are some cities. So they're moving out of San Francisco. They're moving out of New York. They're moving out of San Jose. They're moving out of Seattle. There's still a lot of people there, but they're moving to some other places that are still big cities. They have the amenities and advantages, but there are more of them. They're spread around the country, and this author in the Wall Street Journal calls them rising star cities. And the Brookings Institution says that they're going to places like Atlanta, Dallas, Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis. And of course, there are others. And so, what you're seeing is sometimes companies will actually hire you to work remotely. Mm-hmm. You will never be required to work in the office. And so people can really take a job, but they can live where they want to. And there are good and bad things about that. And that's how I ended my commentary, was to say there are opportunities for the church, because if you work remotely and you're in your home, you're not meeting a lot of people, especially if you just move somewhere. So the church can offer that community. So this is an opportunity then for churches, I think, to see all these new people coming in who are often young, because they're in these tech industries, and they are people that can be then influenced by the church.
Again, a crisis of loneliness, and I think the church can really address those issues. And so, again, Penna Dexter's commentary, if you'd like to read it in its entirety, it's on the website right now. If you go and click on that button, one of the things you'll notice is that when you sit read now, there's another button that says never miss a viewpoint. Sign up here. And the viewpoint commentaries, I know at least for mine, are in over 600 stations now. There are more people that hear my commentary than even hear Point of View, and I suspect they probably hear yours as well, because I know you're on all the Bot Radio Network and all sorts of others. So these are resources that are available to you, very well written, very short, and I would encourage you to sign up and to do that as well. Let me say that we probably will not get much time today to talk about Victor Davis Hanson, although we have talked with him before, and that's always been fun. But this one he posted on The Real Reset is Coming, and I'll just postpone that maybe to Tuesday, because I do have a booklet coming out on the Great Reset. It really deserves some time and attention anyway, so you might want to read it over the weekend. That's kind of your homework assignment for this. But I did want to leave some time for an opportunity for Lathan to maybe just tell us a little bit about what's going on at First Liberty. Usually we start by talking about First Liberty and religious liberty cases. Thought in this case we'd mix it up and do it at the end. But you have 3 different cases right now before the Supreme Court, and then some others that are percolating around in different lower courts. So give us an overview of what's happening, and if nothing else, give us a prayer target or two.
Sure. So Coach Kennedy's case will be argued at the Supreme Court a month from today, April 25th. And so once we get through oral argument, then we have to wait on the decision for the opinion to be published. And since it's going to be argued late April, I would expect, probably in June sometime we'll get that decision. We already argued Carson versus Macon, which was a school choice issue out of the state of Maine. Argued that back in February, I believe, late January, early February. And I'm kind of surprised we don't even have that opinion yet. I think it could probably come out any day now. And that should be, we're hopeful is going to be a very big win for parents and religious schools and school choice. And then we currently have, our Navy SEALs case, where the Biden administration has asked the Supreme Court to overturn the Fifth Circuit, who upheld the district court, who imposed an injunction on the Navy,
crazy.
Which basically told the Navy, you cannot make these SEALs get the vaccine while the case is going on, and you cannot take punitive action against them. The Navy has blatantly violated that injunction and has taken punitive action against these men. And we actually asked the district court to hold them in contempt for violating that order. But in the meantime, the government appealed. The Fifth Circuit upheld the district court. So now they're asking the United States Supreme Court to say, to lift that injunction, which would then allow them to continue punishing our clients for requesting a religious accommodation to the vaccine mandate. So, this is one where we actually hope the Supreme Court just refuses to take the case.
Yes. You'd be better off that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just deny cert, and that leaves the Fifth Circuit's opinion in place, which upholds the injunction. So definitely keep praying for Coach Kennedy, and pray for the justices Clarence Thomas's health has been bad. Pray for good health for him. And that we get the decisions that will protect religious liberty, not just for our clients, but for everybody else. And in the SEALs case, also, we're still in the process of getting the class action certified.
Right.
We modified that to protect everyone in the Navy who requested an accommodation. So lots going on, lots of other cases happening, but that's probably the top three, I would say.
You go to firstliberty.org, scroll down a little bit, you'll see a picture of Keisha Russell, and that is her testimony before the Supreme Court confirmation hearing. So if you'd like to see that, you can certainly see what she has testified. You can see a picture of her and certainly be praying for her. Also, one of the cases she's been dealing with is Shields of Faith. Where are we on that particular case?
It's Shields of Strength, actually.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
So Shields of Strength, that is actually a Texas-based company that makes replica dog tags with inspirational verses on them. And our good friend in his mom's basement out in New Mexico somewhere, Mikey Weinstein, didn't like that and sent a nastygram to the Department of Defense. And they then all of a sudden decided they would not license Kenny Vaughn, who has this company, to use the official trademarks, the logos and the insignias of the service branches. So we're involved. The litigation's ongoing. We'd love to get this wrapped up quickly, but the court system moves the way the court system moves. So it's in process, and as soon as we have updates, I'll be here to tell them. Yeah, exactly.
And again, firstliberty.org. I want you to find all of that there. You can sign up to also find out about some of the other things that they are doing. And this has been great to convene you guys together, because last time we were together, we were at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. So thank you both for being here today. Let me say thank you to a variety of people today that have been helping out. Engineering has been both Doug and Steve today, so that's been kind of fun. We got Ivy as well as Gracie in there with the production part and taking some of the phone calls. So again, you've got all sorts of resources that we have posted on the website. Over the weekend, you might want to watch some March Madness, and those of you that want to root for Arkansas, as Lathan is, that'll be kind of fun. We'll see how that unfolds. And don't forget, on Monday, we'll be back here, but we're going to do a Millennial Roundtable on Monday, and I'll be with you back here on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. See you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
How has Point of View shaped your point of view? For the last half-century, Point of View has brought light to the culture thanks to the partnership of listeners and supporters like you. That's right, it's been 50 years. To celebrate our 50-year anniversary, Point of View wants to hear from you. Has Point of View ever inspired you to take action? Do you feel your faith and Christian worldview have been strengthened by the program? If so, share your story with us. Email it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Point of View would be nothing without you. You are Point of View's legacy. Don't let that legacy be forgotten. Share your story today. Tell the next generation how Point of View impacted your life. Your testimony could even be featured on the program. Again, share it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Story@pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.